Welcome to Joffiel Whispers. My name is Nairi. I want to talk to you today about the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games. I know there have been many commentators talking about it, and we're probably sick of hearing about it. Most of them speak about it reluctantly because they feel that it's really a diversion from more important issues that are happening in the world right now. But I don't think it is a diversion. I think it's actually of deep significance, and I think we need to look at that, both in terms of what's happening in the world right now and historically about where we are in our history as a species. So I want to talk about two things, to delve into two aspects of these opening ceremonies. Now, I haven't watched them all the way through. I've only seen small details, and of course the most significant aspect was the frieze of the Last Supper, which so many Christians believe was an affront to Christianity. I don't believe it was an affront to Christianity. I believe there was a very important narrative happening that is, as I say, of greater significance. So I want to talk about two things. Firstly, if you understand that that frieze was full of symbolism, you probably realise that, but you may not know what the symbolism means. And I'm going to just focus on four things with regard to that. And then I'd like to talk to you about the history of the Olympic Games and to help you understand that what has happened is totally in keeping with the historical Olympic Games. It's not a new phenomenon, it's actually reverting back to the games, to the original games, and I'll explain why in a minute. So let me begin with the frieze itself and the symbolism involved. You obviously intended to perceive it as a Bacchanale, a feast of Bacchus, or the ancient Greek god Dionysus. And on the surface it does look like that. But let's have a look at what we're seeing here. Let's begin with the figure in the middle, with the what looks like the halo, the crown that we associate with images of Christ, which of course is meant to be the halo of God, of the Son, of light. Well, what we're really looking at is a halo of Lucifer. Now, I know if I say Lucifer, you're thinking Satan. Well, the terms Lucifer and Satan have somehow become associated over the years as meaning the same thing. But Lucifer, of course, means light. Lucifer is light. Lucifer is about seeing the truth about things, about enlightenment, about overcoming ignorance, becoming wise, knowledgeable, aspiring to all the best that humanity has to offer. Whereas Satan, of course, is the shadow side. Satan is about ignorance. It's about giving into our natural forces mindlessly. So what is that halo? Well, it looks to me as though it represents both, and I'll explain why. If you look at the spikes coming out from the halo, you'll see there are two shapes on the end of the spikes. One is a kind of round curly shape, which I can't identify properly from the photos I've seen, but what I can definitely identify is that alternating between those spikes are spikes with what looks like arrowheads on the tips. Now, a halo with an arrowhead or a shard or a spike does represent Satan. So what I'm thinking is that some of the spikes represent the light and other spikes represent the dark. That's the first point. The second point I want to make is that the character in front, who many people have argued is Bacchus, so it's a Bacchanalian feast, it's not Bacchus. he is not surrounded by grapevines. He's surrounded by fruits, and he is being served up on a platter. The question to ask is, why is he coloured blue? Well, what do you associate the colour blue with? Dare I say blue blood? And who are the blue bloods? They are the royal families, the original royal families going way back in history, not the modern royal families, the original royal families. And here they are being served up on a platter. What does that symbolise to you? Is it something to do with the destruction of the royal families? Maybe. I'll leave that to you to sort out. There are two other things. If you look to your left when you're looking at the image, you'll see there's a child there. Now the first question is, why is there a child there? This is an adult feast. But the second question is, why is it that the man next to the child bends down and looks at him and does this gesture? What does that gesture mean to you? Slit your throat? Or I'm going to slit your throat? The child imitates him, does the same gesture. That is symbolic of the child giving their consent to being sacrificed. If that doesn't shock you, it should. We are talking about an image that has been broadcast over the whole world in an event that affects almost the whole world. That should make you nervous. The fourth thing is that we have in the background, we obviously are meant to think it suggests the Last Supper before Christ is sacrificed on the cross. But in fact, there is a description in the Bible by St. Paul of a feast where he is concerned that the feast is too pagan. It's not a Christian feast, because the wealthy, the aristocracy, who had enough money to indulge, were feasting on especially fine cuisine and indulging in wine. Not only that, Paul was concerned that they were consuming the flesh of animals that had been sacrificed to idols. Not to God, but to idols. So there's a whole historic context there. And if you look at it in that way, you will understand that it's not an attack on Christianity. It's an observation about those two opposed forces, Satan and Lucifer. That's essentially what it's about. And I'll just briefly make one more observation before I go to the history of the Olympic Games, because if you look at the history of the Games and look at the way they're happening now, there are a couple of really interesting things about that. But let me just comment on the image of Marie Antoinette, who with her head lopped off. Now, if you don't know, during the French Revolution, I can't remember the exact year, I apologise, but in the mid-1700s, the French Revolution occurred, the storming of the Bastille. And what was the French Revolution about? It was the rising of the masses, of the proletariat, the working class people, against those in power. That's essentially what it is. And that's exactly what we're beginning to see in the world today, this rise against power. So then we had the beheading, the guillotining of Marie Antoinette and her husband, Charles I. And the most interesting thing about that is, I don't know if you know anything about astrology, but I do watch a couple of astrologers who I find really interesting. And they are all talking about the fact that the planetary aspects around us right now, at this point in time, are almost identical, not identical, but almost identical to the planetary aspects at the time of the French Revolution. Now, I find that really interesting, and you should too. We are looking at French history, but we are looking at history repeating itself. Look at all the riots that are beginning to happen. People, the riots in the UK with Muslim youth rising against the establishment in the UK, people demonstrating against governments all over the world. We see aspects of revolution happening around us right now. So the whole thing is either there's a message in it. There's definitely a message. Now, whether the message is this is how the world is right now, or the message is this is what we are planning for the world, I don't know. But I think if you're paying attention, you will understand how very significant that. So let's look at the history of the Games. The first Olympic Games were held in 776 BC in Olympia on the island of Peloponnesus in Greece. They are believed to have been inaugurated by Alcime, the daughter of Lycomedes, and they were part of a whole festival in honour of the god Zeus. And I'll describe in a moment how they were run, but they were abandoned or abolished in 393 AD, almost 1,000 years later, by Theodosius I, who decreed that all pagan cults were to be eliminated. Now, 393 BC, we're looking at the period of Constantine the Great, who was the first emperor to convert to Christianity, who convened the Nicene Agreement, or the Nicene, what's it called? I can't remember what the term is, but it was decreed that the only form of worship was to be worshipped to the one God, in other words, the Christian God. So here we have the abolishment of a pagan festival. The original games were apparently men only. They would compete with one another naked, no weapons. They weren't allowed to cause any sort of mortal injury, and the genitals, of course, were anathema. It had to be a fair fight. Now, the interesting thing is they were called the Pan-Hellenic Games, and the pilgrims and competitors could come from all over Greece with safe passage, because all the Hellenic states were at war with one another. And this was obviously a way for men to prove their dominance through physical prowess. It was highly political. This is where political allegiances were made. As I said, they were part of a greater festival in honour of the god Zeus. And if you've been to Olympia, you will see that the ruins of the temple of Zeus are smack bang in the middle of the village of Olympia. Here's the interesting thing. As part of the festival, there were literally banquets where people indulged. It was quite decadent. There was also theatre performances, people reading poetry, dancing, music. It was two aspects of the human condition, the finest, the strongest, the most powerful, against those who were less powerful, who just wanted to indulge themselves. So really what we're seeing in the modern games is just an aspect of that. But here's the interesting thing. When I was young, the opening ceremony consisted entirely of a massive parade of people from all the countries in the world. They would be in their country's uniform, they would carry the country's flag, there would be music, they'd march to marching music, and then the torch would be carried into the city. I remember seeing John Landy with the torch in Melbourne in 1956 when I was a little girl. It was all about the athletics. There was no festival otherwise. There was no music and poetry. It was simply the athletes. But over the years, increasingly, we have seen more and more impressive displays of the arts in the ceremonies, to the point where now the ceremony seems to have gone back to the original Greek pagan cult. We now suddenly have this competition between Lucifer and Satan again. And isn't that interesting that we're going through a period where more and more people are reverting back to Christianity? There's a huge new Christian movement happening at the moment. Is that because people can see that we're heading into an age of ignorance? We seem to be living in a world full of information, but is that information true? Is it real knowledge? Are we all actually indulging in a mass display of ignorance? Or is it the opposite? Is Lucifer lighting up our minds? Are we finally seeing the truth about how our world is run and realizing that the only way into the future is to be wise, to be knowledgeable and wise within ourselves, and make sure that we are part of the future, that we are creating the future, not that we are victims of it. So I could make the video longer, I could go into more detail, but I think that's enough information to, or enough ideas to get you thinking about what we are really seeing and the significance of it. It's almost as if we are being told to open our eyes, to not be unconscious. You know, if you look back even further to ancient Greece, long before the Games, if we look back another 1,000 years before the Games, we come to the period of the Eleusinian mystery schools. Now, I've talked about those in a previous video, maybe several times. And the Eleusinian mysteries were literally about enlightenment. They were highly respected because of their intense philosophical reasoning, because of their morality, because of their belief that the finest aspects of our lives are to do with logic, mathematics, philosophy, theology, cosmology. But at the same time, there were other mystery schools, and one of them was the Dionysian mystery school. Now, we think of Dionysus or Bacchus as being decadent, as representing the base part of our natures. But originally Dionysus, the god of wine, wasn't that. That's not what he was about. Certainly there were festivals in which they indulged in wine. But Dionysus originally was about, he turned water into wine. He helped people to find sweetness and to understand the forces, the destructive forces, and to find a way of dealing with them in this life. He was known, interestingly, as the Saviour. Now, isn't that interesting that that's the term that was used to describe Dionysus, the Saviour? It's also believed, but of course we can't go back that far in history, but it is also, I've seen references to the fact or the belief that Dionysus was born on the 25th of December. And because he refused to give in to authority, he was murdered by the Titans. And of course we think of the Titans as being mythological characters, but if you've been paying attention, you'll understand that we are beginning to see that all of those ancient gods may not have been just ideas in people's minds or archetypes of human beings. They may well have been real entities, real humanoids of some sort, maybe from off planet, because so many ancient cultures talk about the sky gods coming down to help them, to sometimes to control them. Not all the sky gods were good, but they taught them. They in their cultures they talk about being taught about agriculture and science. They were being given knowledge by these entities. But here we have the Titans, who were obviously not good humanoids, destroying Dionysus because he was the Saviour. So he was born on the 25th of December. He rose again with the help of Apollo, the sun god, on the 28th of March, I think is the supposed date. He rose again from the dead. Apparently, in ancient Greek times, there was a regular festival to Dionysus in which he was represented, brought out into the community in the form of a small child as a symbol. Now that's really interesting stuff. I'm not saying that Christ was Dionysus. I don't know what happened nearly 3,500 years ago. But let us understand, if you're paying attention, if you've looked into any of this, you will understand that all of those religious precepts go back, the whole Christian mythology or narrative, the whole Christian narrative goes way back in time. I have seen researchers who claim that Mary, mother of Christ, was in fact the Egyptian god Isis, and Christ represents Horus, the child she created from the thallus of her dead husband. And in fact Dionysus was rumoured to have been born of a virgin too. Can you see how all these narratives are intertwined? They're all aspects, they're all double aspects of the human condition. There's so much material there for you to delve into, and I hope you will. I hope you'll find this has stimulated some ideas for you. I certainly find the whole thing intriguing, but most importantly, I feel that what happened at the Olympic Games in 2024 is highly significant. I could be wrong, but that's what I believe. I think I'll leave you with that. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you'll join me next time. Until then, stay well, stay blessed.